Hey there.
Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
I'm here in my teaching Zoom studios. I got three cameras. I got this one. I got the whiteboard camera here,
Oh my God.
wide camera. I'm
This
state of
is,
the art here, man.
isn't a year ago, we would have never thought of this. And now here we all are. And it's like, yeah, of course, I've got multiple cameras on me at all times.
So true. It's so true.
Well, I love it. It makes Zoom easy. And for starters, can you just say and spell your first and last name and give your title as well?
Yes, I'm Glenn, Glenn, Reynolds, Reynolds, and I'm professor of law at the University of Tennessee College of Law.
So this seems to be a conversation that we have over and over again every time the Board of Health a new mandate, whether it's masks, whether it's curfew, and we kind of come to the same conclusion. But I'm going to ask again, when we talk to the constitutionality of a mandate like this that would make bars and restaurants close on a curfew and limit the number of people, you as an expert in this, how do you answer that? How do you explain to people that this is or isn't?
Well, the thing is, that's actually the right answer. It is or it isn't. Um, the government has a lot of power in dealing with a crisis like a pandemic to exercise a lot of discretion. However, at the very least, everything the government does, even when it doesn't implicate any specific constitutional rights, everything they do has to be reasonably related to a legitimate governmental purpose. Now, controlling the spread of a disease is obviously a legitimate governmental purpose. But still, the question is what they're doing reasonably related to that based on what we know now? And the answer to that depends. For example, if you're going to close down bars, it's helpful if your contact tracing information, which we've now been gathering for like 6 months, shows that bars are actually a significant source of infection. If they are, then it's reasonable. If they're not, then it's not. Now, I noticed Nashville has a little scandal because the Nashville government was, Davidson County government was apparently sitting on data that said bars and restaurants were not a significant source of contagion there. I don't know if it's the same here, but that would tell you whether it's reasonable or not. If they are a source of contagion, it's reasonable. If they're not, and you're just doing it out of some sort of, instinctual prejudice that, well, a bar must be bad, then it's not reasonable, and a court would likely strike it down. And I will say courts have been striking down restrictions much more freely in the last month or two than they were at the beginning of the pandemic because we know more now and we can tell what's reasonable and what's not.
And there's been, obviously this has been a conversation. Again, a year ago, if you said this is what we'd be talking about, we all would have laughed. But there's been a lot of talk too about enforcement on this. Is that something that comes into, our legal rights, the constitutionality when it comes to talking to local law enforcement about, hey, you've got to uphold whatever this board is saying?
Well, so far, really, almost all the enforcement on this stuff has been voluntary. People have been willing to go along because they think that it's important and they want to protect their neighbors and so on. As long as people think that what the government is doing is being done in good faith and is probably right, they'll go along with it. If people decide not to go along with it, there's nowhere near enough enforcement to make a difference. If people just decide to keep their businesses open, if people just decide to start going out, if people decide not to wear masks, there's nothing anybody can do about it. They'll be swamped. They always say law enforcement is mostly to keep the honest people honest, and that's true here too. The most important thing public health officials have really is trust and the public's belief that they are acting in good faith, and it's super important that they maintain that.
And last night we saw this lawsuit kind of brought against representatives of bars and restaurants came together and basically said, hey, we need a little more oversight. We want to be involved in this a little bit more. Are we going to start seeing more lawsuits like that where owners of businesses are kind of pushing back legally against Board of Health or bodies like it?
Absolutely, and they're going to win a lot of those. In Pennsylvania, the federal court there struck down a ban on gatherings of 25 or more people and said it just wasn't reasonable and that the government's powers simply do not extend that far. There are a bunch of old pandemic cases that are like over 100 years old that offer sweeping power to the government. But they're very old cases. And his conclusion and that of some other federal judges who've looked at this is that in light of stuff the Supreme Court's done since then, they're just not good law anymore. And that there has to be much more scrutiny over government actions in this field, just as there is in every other field.
So I know we keep, I started this with, hey, is this constitutional? We keep asking it every time, but you as an expert in this, is that the right question that we should be asking, or am I missing something in this conversation?
Well, I mean, the Constitution is sort of the backstop to keep the government from doing things that are dangerous or arbitrary or oppressive. But the front end of that is really the political process, and it's people communicating to their political leaders what they want, and it's also political leaders exercising some independent judgment. The courts are there to keep the honest people honest in the political sphere too. But they're supposed to try to get it right on their own. They take an oath to protect the Constitution. They're there to protect people, and they have to realize that controlling a disease is one thing, and it's important. But people have a right to earn a living under the Constitution and just under natural justice, and you can't overly interfere with that. I mean, here we are. I was an early advocate of closing things down, but for a shorter period. But this is what, day 202 of our 15 days to slow the spread. I mean, things change, and just doing the same thing over and over again is maybe not the right approach. Maybe they need to be thinking out of the box about ways to focus on this that target the vulnerable populations, but don't crush the economy everywhere.
And I think, and even just a little bit of what you've been saying, there's a lot of interpretation of the Constitution. I feel like I've had so many conversations in the same sentence where, or in the same day with people where I talk to one person and okay, this is how it is. And then you talk to another person and they kind of change it. Is that normal when we talk about the Constitution, this document that was created so many years ago?
In a lot of ways, yes, it is. And, that's why we have the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court doesn't always get it right. There's a famous statement by, I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said, the Supreme Court isn't final because it's infallible. It's infallible because it's final. They get the last word, right or wrong.
Is there anything else related to this that you think is important as we start to, talk about this? I keep calling it a mandate, but this new kind of guidelines for bars and restaurants?
Well, I think that I've been paying pretty close attention to this since the beginning, and the health officials and you folks in the media are spending a lot of time talking about cases, and case numbers are up. You don't hear nearly as much about hospitalizations or deaths. And those have not followed the cases up this time the way they did back at the very beginning of this outbreak. And I think people need to be thinking about that and saying that things that seem to be justified by saving lives in March may not be as justified now, because they're just not going to save as many lives, because not nearly as many people are getting really sick or dying. And I don't think that's really been factored into the planning, and I think it probably should be.
And that goes back to like what you were saying of, you've got to know, as citizens, as elected officials, you've got to trust that your government is working in good faith. And good faith defined in March looks different than good faith now in, what are we in, September?
March just seems like it lasted forever.
I know,
year.
yeah. Is it 2030? I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's right. Things that you could do in good faith in March where we didn't know anything are things that now really might not be reasonable because we know a lot more. And one of the things we know is that while the cases are exploding, the deaths and the hospitalizations are not exploding in the same fashion. And as we weigh risks versus benefits, we have to take that into account.
And now this is kind of, it goes in the vein of what we're talking about, the Constitution, but today is National Constitution Day, I believe. And I've been asked by one of my producers when she saw that I would be talking to an expert, do you know anything about this? Basically to say, why is a day like this, National Constitution Day, these conversations we're having, it seems like we've talked about the Constitution more in the last 9 months than maybe I have in my entire life outside of history class, which can be good, I guess.
Well, I will say the more Americans are talking about the Constitution, usually the worse things are going. So maybe we shouldn't be so thrilled that it's coming up so much.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else that I haven't asked or you haven't said that you think is important?
Only that the state legislature is currently reviewing the powers of the governor and other state officials in a pandemic. The statute they operate under goes back to 1951. It was actually drafted with nuclear war in mind, primarily, and they are looking to see if they need to have more safeguards and more controls involved. And I think they're going to meet again next week, in fact, on that.
Thank you so much. I'll double check into that too. And I loved your point about kind of those the information of where we're basing things on. Is there, lines to bars and restaurants as far as spreading this in Knox County, or isn't there when we're making these decisions? Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
I haven't followed it up, but I know the last time I heard somebody from the Board of Health talk about it, they were saying that bars and restaurants didn't seem to be a major source of infections. I think that was a couple of months ago. So they may know stuff now that they didn't know then, but that's the last I heard from them at least.
Thank you so much for taking
Thank
the
you.
time. I'll send you a link to this story when it airs. It should be on tonight at 6.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.